Welcome everyone to this week's IPLD sync meeting. It's January the 25th, 2021. Welcome everyone. As every week we go over the stuff that we've worked on the past week and then the stuff that we work on next, and then discuss any agenda items there might be. I start with myself. So the update is kind of like 2 weeks because we haven't had a meeting last week. But yeah, I just came back from holidays the week before, so I don't have that much news. But so what I did was I thought about schemas and how because I have kind of a different view on schemas than Eric has, and therefore go IPLD prime, and just that writing down how it looks in my universe. Yeah, just feel free to check it out. The link is in the notes. And then just from the JavaScript world, there's currently in JS IPFS, they spend a lot of time or try to finish getting their TypeScript types in JS docs done. And sometimes things break, and there was another occasion where things break, but things are fixed now. And so it also basically trickled down to the multi-format stuff. And most recently, I looked briefly into WASM stuff. The background is that so I don't want to build a full-fledged IPLD in WASM, but the idea is that one could perhaps implement codecs in WASM, and then IPLD implementations that don't have a codec implemented could at least use a WASM runtime to use those codecs. So for example, you have some esoteric codec and you run it in WASM, but then it could also work in the Go implementation as well as the JS implementation. That's the idea. As a first proof of concept kind of thing. And of course, I ran into an issue right there because I wanted to use multi-value returns. I don't go into the details. It's just nicer to work with if you have those things. And to my surprise, it didn't really work with Rust. So I wrote a small tool that is using some of the Rust stuff to actually make it work with the current version of Rust. And so now you can even create, so that long story short is, if you want to have multi-value returns in your WebAssembly and you don't want to use the whole WASM bindgen library, what you can do is you can just still return multi-values and then run the code that I've written based on the WASM bindgen stuff to transform your existing WASM file into a new WASM file that then does multi-returns. All right, that's all I have from the IPLD side of things. Next on my list is Eric.
Work continues on the work in Go IPLD Prime to take the schema interfaces that library uses to reason about types and the stuff that feeds into the codegen, etc., and the data model tree types, the generated DMT stuff. Refresher, I had originally hoped to make these two connect by simply straight up unifying them, because I thought that would involve the least additional lines of code written. And that didn't fly because of an import cycler. And I am so sad. So what I'm doing now, the new approach is I'm implementing a compiler system that kind of stands in the middle. So the data flow will be, you've got the DMT types that are generated. Yeah, I know. I don't know if anyone watching this recording later can see, but Will is making this face that is amazing and accurate. It describes horror. What it is, this is reasonably accurately described as a compiler because it's doing like a bunch of graph property validation stuff. It's stuff that you cannot do on like a tree view alone. You actually have to take a bunch of facts and compile them all at once and be like, does this cross-reference? So now the data flow is going to be, you've got the DMT, which is just the tree form of the parse of the thing. And then you've got the compiler. You feed data into that, and the compiler spits out the schema types. And then those are like a read-only piece of reference information. And then that powers the code gen or like any other reasoning you want to do with that information. So 3 steps. There's a branch out that I haven't yet even made a formal PR, but if you want to watch the branch, there's a link in the notes. There's a big old hackme file in Markdown Prose that talks about why this design and like 6 others that we considered between me and some Daniel suggestions. This has been unfun to implement. I'm up to several thousand lines of boilerplate. This really is frustrating because I've got basically the same data structures in the DMT types that are generated, and then I'm repeating them again in the compiler types that hold on to them just long enough to copy them into the schema types. I hope no one else ever has to write code like this again. Anyway, so most of it compiles now. I've managed to port some of the tests at this point, so it seems to be looking good. There's a little bit more boilerplate to crank out yet. A bunch of the current tests in CodeGen use the old placeholder schema constructor methods, and so those I think now all need to be migrated to use the new compiler thing. I'm kind of tempted to make a farther jump and replace them all with JSON, because then I could take them through the whole like parse JSON, feed DMT, feed compiler step. But it seems like kind of a big jump, and I don't quite want to do it all at once. Partially because it will also be a lot smoother after we get another feature or 2 in for the CodeGen itself. Like, it would be really nice if structs parse implicits correctly. Schema JSON parses a little weirdly until that's finished. So the one other piece of interesting reference in there for anyone in other languages maybe wants to look at, I've now ported the rules for schema validation. So all of the stuff that you have to look at as the compiler that isn't just like raw parsing the JSON. And I've tried to make that into a nice like table sort of structure in code. So there's structs that have like, here's the rule name, here's the condition that makes it apply, and then here's the actual check. So I'm hoping that these are going to be, you'll still have to read Go code at the end of the day, but like hopefully it's relatively like you just read the thing linearly and you go, okay, I'm going to port this, and just like check them off. I hope. If anyone in other languages wants to review that for legibility, I would be welcome. It seems like forever ago, but a couple weeks ago, we also had some discussions around encryption, and I've got at least one PR up with an exploration report about that. I'm no longer sure if this has been eclipsed by other discussions or not. It might have been. I didn't allocate a large amount of time for this in advance, so what I've pushed there is as is. And like, if somebody can find that document useful, that's great, but it's not a ball that I intend to carry otherwise. So just warning on that. And that's about it. I've just really been grinding away on this boilerplate. That's it.
Thanks. The next one is Daniel.
Cool. So I made some good progress on the Hamd ADL. I know I mentioned earlier something about map keys having to be strings in IPLD prime, and I'm sorry for bringing up that because it's entirely useless and pointless for what I'm trying to do. I was just doing the wrong thing, and I got stuck because of it. And then only much later did I realize I was doing the wrong thing anyway. So what I was trying to do is Daxi were encode a Hamd, but I was just giving it the Hamd directly, which acts like a map. So what I was actually doing is just encoding the map, which is not at all what I want to do. So, map iteration, it works now with string keys, but that's irrelevant for what I'm trying to do at the moment. I added a Filecoin version 3 mode alongside the existing IPLD spec mode, if you want to call it that. So now every method has like an if-else for like, what am I going to do with this and that. The nice thing with all this is that the block layer format is the same for both. Because the bitmap behaves differently. The bytes are a big end for Filecoin, and they're a much nicer spec'd out thing for rods. spec, but it's still bytes at the raw level, so that's easy. And the other difference is that the root node is not present in our hemmed. So, sorry, it's not present in filecones hemmed. So in that mode, I just skip it entirely because the parameters are hard-coded. So what I did was, it took me a while to learn how to use cborgen and filecoins library and all that. But once I did, I essentially constructed a very small map and encoded it in cbor. And then I'm trying to reproduce exactly the same bytes with my library, an IPLD primes DAC cbor package. And I'm actually nearly there. Everything is the same except for the bytes array, which for some reason I end up with different bytes, and I'm still debugging that. And I also wrote the CI best practice for Go document. We decided to put it in the IPLD repo because initially it's going to apply to the IPLD Go repos. Later, other teams can adopt it if they want. And it seemed like an okay place for now. And Martin and Eric left some reviews, which is nice. So I expect to merge it probably this week. And also something that I've mentioned before, and that's continuing, is the work towards what you can call encoding JSON version 2. So mostly I've been doing code review there, maybe for like a couple of hours a week. We usually meet on Fridays. And just as a quick update, what we're finishing now is the tokenization. So essentially converting from bytes to a token stream and then back to bytes if you want. And then it has some nice properties. So for example, it has a state machine, so it doesn't allow you to encode a sequence of tokens that's invalid JSON syntactically. And it also has other things like it reuses tokens fit in memory. Sorry, they fit in the stack, so it doesn't allocate that much. And it also has nice things like when you keep asking tokens, it reuses the same buffer. But then when you ask it the next token, it invalidates the previous token. So it's both memory efficient, but also saves you against holding onto memory for too long. But anyway, I say all this because I expect to have something shareable in a few weeks, meaning that it hopefully is a nicer API, lower level for encoding and decoding JSON tokens, which we might want to use for things like DAC JSON. And that's about it for me.
Thanks. Next one is Peter.
Yes, so with some other organizational stuff, didn't get to do as much work as I wanted, but SQLops is moving along. Things are slow because we have a lot of them data. But so a number of milestones, so multiple instances can run off the same database now, like active instances without conflicting with each other, actually writing to the same block store without stepping on each other's toes. End up having to write an actual LRU cache implementation myself because there is just nothing out there that has the parameters that I need, or if it does, in the case of Ristretto, which is by the same folks that did Badger, it is both leaky and crashy under stress, so no go. This thing is running correctly, but it seems to be capturing some memory when I don't want it to, so I need to find why that is. Otherwise, things slowly grow to like 110 gigabytes, which is not great. The planning of the entire thing finally checks out. I needed to basically get an entire set of active blocks into the data store to see how it is going to behave, how it's going to be laid out on disk and things like that. So without doing anything funny to Postgres, like no extensions, no nothing, we will be able to last about 7 years. Had the current growth rate, and after that we'll have to look at some other block store. But what I put in is already about 20 times larger than what we have on cluster. So it's holding up pretty well. And yeah, my next steps, hopefully early this week, is to get Will a final library to actually a standalone library to be able to use with this block store, and to chat with the Postgres consultancy to actually figure out if there are any caveats for us opening this up for externals to be able to sync this database locally with streaming replication. The upshot there being that you do not have to deal with more than 2 billion objects. You just stream through updates in a very well-packaged format and so on and so forth. And that's all I have.
Thanks. Does anyone else have any updates?
I thought I put a little update in there, but maybe it didn't show up.
It's at the bottom is something, so I'm not sure. Okay, so yeah. Oh yeah, I see it now. Yeah.
Okay.
I put it up. Yeah.
I did a couple quick things. One is that I changed those specs for the encrypted blocks quite a bit. So there's now sort of one multi-codec and one format for encrypted blocks. And then there's a multi-codec identifier in the block for the cipher and another, and then you have to put the length of the initial vector in there as well, because that's now variable. So we took a little bit of a hit in terms of bytes that have to go in the block format, but it kind of normalizes the spec a little bit. It makes it a little cleaner. Reduces the amount of codecs that you would have to ship in order to support this, because now you can get to the unencrypted state of any cipher without actually having the ciphers around. You just have to have this codec for unencrypted block or for encrypted blocks. So it's a lot nicer. And so these changes all came based on feedback. And I updated the implementation in multi-formats as well to be in line with that. And then I did a bunch of work on IPSQL. I got S3 as a backend working. So there's now like databases in S3 that you can just query from S3 without any extra infrastructure. So that's really fun. Yeah, now I'm working on like a refactor of the kind of SQL engine and how that whole thing works. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks.
I have a quick update.
Okay.
I actually, it's my first day at Amazon, so I took a full-time position, so that's why I'm no longer consulting, contracting with Particle Labs anymore. But on the positive side is I am evangelizing IPLD within AWS. So hoping to find ways of working together going forward, and I'm expecting to listen in on these meetings at least weekly. But I just figured I'd let everyone know, since I was gone the last 2 weeks and not able to provide an update, but that is where I have gone and what I'm doing. That's it.
Thanks. Congratulations. Good news. So yeah, I'm looking forward to still have you sometimes around in this call. So cool. All right. So I've put an item on the agenda, but or does anyone else have an update? Sorry. Johnny, I can't hear you. You are speaking. Is it so you are? I can't hear you. Can anyone else hear Johnny? Okay.
How about now?
Yes.
There we go. Yeah, sometimes electric shock, I touch my microphone and it goes out. So I had emailed Michael, and Michael, thank you so much for responding to this issue that I'll put in the chat with the, as you guys know, I've been working on the DID spec, the decentralized identifier spec, and mostly writing the CBOR section, including a subsection on DAG CBOR, and really mostly trying to get to a canonical representation. If there's a whole bunch of complexity, but a lot of the deterministic canonical representation that I've asked you guys about before, language is in there. It was supposed to be in the general CBOR section, with the only constraint for DAG CBOR was tag 42. So anyways, there's big brouhaha and an issue filed for security flaws in DAG CBOR. And if you could take a look at the issue, and Michael's already responded, thank you so much. And even Juan responded this morning. Mostly what I could use help on is just muscle of just, they're trying to remove it, tag CBOR, from the specification because there's not a lot of implementers using it. I'm like the only one on these calls, probably because like who wants to be hurting these cats? But if you could respond with saying, hey, we know about DAG CBOR. We're willing to help out with writing some test suite implementations for the canonical representation. And I greatly appreciate it.
I also got a ping today from one. I think we're going to look into joining W3C just to make sure that we can get rid of any of these IPR concerns around DAG CBOR.
Brilliant. That would be wonderful too. Yeah. And if you like some of these test suites, so the DID specification is basically just a document that is basically just like the keys. And so it is just a way of representing key material. So some of the original language I put in there were like handling big ints and big floats and how to doubles and actually make the smallest representation. And that piggybacks off of what Volker had put in for the specification, as well as the RFC 749. And so, but I think it's blown up into this big, oh my God, security vulnerabilities. And it really is, I think I call it corporate jousting, is very much just trying to, because there's competing specifications, including something called CBOR LD, linked data, which is a external dictionary using int as keys. But if you could show me some love and respond and just give me some muscle to back up this, that'd be wonderful.
I don't quite understand how they're characterizing the determinism issues as security issues. Like, they're annoying, like they're bad, but I don't know if they're security issues.
So I argue the same thing, and I think because it's actually a feature, not a flaw, which is that you want to have deterministic ordering, and I think and it mostly right now it's competing against like the WebAuthn or JSON LD linked data signature specification, which is what like, certain people actually are trying to strong arm the W3C into using that. You know, my approach really is in the DAG COSE, which is Joel Lurstein from Ceramic and I were actually working on, which is that using DAG CBOR as a signature, and basically the payload is the CID, and we've actually sort of flushed this all out. And so, but it gets into like the, we need an abstract data model, but to go in and out of different serialization formats from from CBOR to JSON, but ultimately the signature has to be on the payload that you signed, which is like the deterministic ordering. So if the ordering of the CBOR and the DAG CBOR, and especially in the CID, all you're doing is signing a payload and a CID in the COSE signature, everything is good. But it just, like I mentioned, it seems to be more corporate jousting of alternative specifications, trying to creep in to compete.
That's too bad.
All right. Thanks for the update. I have on my, so I put on the agenda, I don't know if we want to discuss things, but I wanted to, so I've put, so there are discussions on the multi-codec table. So as the IPLD team also kind of owns the multi-codec stuff, it's part of our work. So the story is that on the multi-codec table, you can open a PR to register a new multi-codec, and then there's discussions if it makes sense or not. And currently the problem is that whether it makes sense or not is mostly in people's heads and not written down. It's still a way to do this, to write it actually down. And especially when it comes to, or what I mostly care is about, like when it comes to IPLD codecs, because this is what you put into the CID, and then it matters about like what is a CID about. And so I've also linked, it's in the agenda, links to some discussions, and probably interesting for folks might be the broader topic about like what is really an IPLD codec. We should more or less nail this down to then have better discussions on those PRs. Yeah, so I already wrote some comment there, but yeah, more comments are welcome. And yeah,
on some level, it may not make sense to force multi-codec entries into one category, it's entirely possible that a multi-codec could be in multiple categories. I think that's already sort of the case, right? Like we use the hashing functions outside of multi-hash, right? Like we use them as identifiers in the HAMT for those same hash functions. So I think that what makes something an IPLD codec is like, have we ascribed meaning to what it means when you use it in a CID? I think that's like the only test really, right? Like if when I see this in a CID, it means that I get this codec to decode that block, then that's an IPLD codec. And maybe we actually need a separate place in IPLD to write down like, these are all the known CID codecs that we support that we know how to decode. And here's like links to those standards, separate from the multi-codec table, because the multi-codec table is going to get big. And it's not all going to be stuff for CIDs. So.
Yeah. So what this discussion kind of is about or like what people sometimes ask for is they want to be able to determine things just based on a CID.
Yeah. No.
And so the push is into kind of like put in like application specific things into CIDs. And like from my point of view, that's not what CID is actually meant for. So they are not, so they shouldn't be built into like a certain point to a certain application or where the data comes from, but like what the data is about. But as all this is quite fuzzy, it's like, yeah, it's just like, it's really, it depends on like who you talk to.
What you just described they can't do is literally what they are as well, right? Like literally what they are is that they are an application specific thing. Like they're saying, go use this application to decode this data. And so
if a decode is an application, yes.
Right. And like what we're saying is that like, okay, is there something that is different from just the block codec that you were trying to embed into that meaning as well? And is there any other way to do it? Because literally every other way of doing it is cheaper. So it makes sense. But like, I think that, yeah, where we say application specific and where we kind of like ascribe certain types of transitions at the CID layer, I think is a bit fuzzier than a lot of people believe it is.
Yeah. They think application specific is probably not the right term for this. Like it's more about Anyway, so I like, if anyone's interested, I guess the best is to like chime into like look at those issues and just read over them and see if you have anything to say. Yeah, that's all I wanted to bring up, because like it's because I think also one of the problems is that we have so many repositories, so it's hard to keep up with things. So it's good to bring up things. So also like if other people like see other things on other repositories, feel free to bring it up so that other people can check it out. Because I don't think that everyone is subscribed to all those repositories. Cool. Yes. So if there's any news, it will probably like also mention it in future editions of this meeting. Okay, is there anything else? No. Then I just saw on the bottom someone wrote that it would be good if we also would talk about like what we do next week. I think this is what we also used to do. So please next week also talk more clearly about like, or put in the notes like what you're doing next week. So just as a reminder. Cool. Anything else? Nope. Then we were quick. Then I close the meeting, and so goodbye everyone, and see you all next week.